What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Drive for Show DFS for Dough here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you talking golf as we do each and every week. There's a tournament here on the platform. Usual co-host Noto is out traveling today, so appreciate having the fill-in for him on the show. None other than Ryan Noonan from Betsperts Golf. He joined us about a month or so ago, so nice to have him back. Of course, I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84, hosting as usual. And Ryan, how you been?
I'm good, but hey, I mean, we're doing it the wrong way. Like Noto gets it. This is a good week to vacation. This is a good week to be traveling and be out of pocket, just in terms of overall golf watching. Although we're here because there's opportunities to be had, there's money to be made, DFS lineups and edges to be had. So we're here. But yeah, just in terms of overall aesthetics of golf course and field. Smart man by taking a week off here.
Yeah, this is after a month of big events and the major and the elevated event. This is the time where we see a lot of the bigger names kind of skip a couple of weeks. You've got the Rocket Mortgage Classic this week. You've got the John Deere Classic next week before the trip over for the Scottish Open and then the Open Championship. So you're going to see weak fields this week and next week. Just based on, the time of the year and the calendar. These two events are always pretty limited in terms of field strength. And we're going to see a lot more birdies than we have in some recent events. So we'll, of course, break down the Rocket Mortgage Classic here over the next half an hour or so. It's a pretty weak field, so it's not going to take us a ton of time to get through it. Maybe Ryan can show off a couple things from the Betsperts tools at the end of the show. But before we get there, we'll take a quick look back at last week. And I think I know why Noto skipped out this week, because we had a big discussion last week about whether or not to play Scheffler. And I was on the side of, one blip at the U.S. Open notwithstanding. I still think he's a robot. So you play Scotty Scheffler. Noto was off of Scheffler last week, and he said, one of us is going to be right. And I don't think he wanted to stand up to the heat on the show tonight. Because I ended up having that the right call on that one. So, and all kidding aside, though, another win for Scheffler last week. A little bit better scoring than expected at the Travelers Championship, but it was pretty wet, and I know they played preferred lies there for a couple rounds. So, but Scheffler still gets the job done, and a couple of guys right on his tail there. But what are some of your takeaways from last week's event?
Yeah, I was in the community that had Tom Kim tickets, so feeling pretty good about 60 on the Tom Kim and have that basically almost, wire to wire. But, Scotty, I get why you'd want to go back. I mean, obviously a little flop lag with him having a 1 week blimp. It's just not how he's been all season long. If you would have told me, though, that we would have got to like 23 under again for a winning score, DFS is a different beast, but I would have thought like Scotty can really separate, because when the test is harder, that's really where he can go out and get it done. I typically wouldn't see, and we'll have some guys today, like there's some guys that are very interesting in terms of just baseline skill set that I don't know are super interesting this week, because I don't know that they can ride the birdie wave that is needed to win here. So Scotty's just different. He's just wired different when he's out gaining 1.5 strokes per round putting. Like that's just what's going to happen. So the fact that he even had to go to a playoff to get a win in that scenario is pretty wild. But yeah, historic stuff. I know people hate it because it's really tough to bet when he's in the field, but like, I don't know. I like history. I like greatness. And I feel like sometimes we're prisoners of the moment for stuff that's maybe not that, but this is that. This is wild stuff. We just haven't seen someone win. 6 wins before July 1st since 1962. We're a little bit older, Justin, but we haven't seen that in our lifetime. So I think it's something to celebrate and appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. It probably won't be too long before all the sports books are throwing out their odds to win without Scheffler, excluding Scheffler, or what have you, however you want to term that, to make the people happy that, just like to bet those, but don't want Scheffler to ruin it each time. But truly remarkable what he's been able to do. He has one bad start, very few and far between, and then seems to bounce back right away. No sustained period of down form for him. And we'll see, if he's able to take that overseas across the pond as well and do well in the Open Championship in about 3 weeks' time. But he's going to be taking these next couple weeks off, along with many of the other big names. Obviously, we had a no-cut event last week, so not like we can talk about premier names that made the cut, but I mentioned a lot of guys in contention. Obviously, Tom Kim made the big putt to get in the playoff, and then Scheffler took him down in the first playoff hole. But Tom Hoagie and Sung Jae Im were both just a couple shots back as well. And I mean, there was a group of maybe 8 or 10 guys that had a chance going into Sunday. Akshay Bhatia, Justin Thomas, Patrick Cantlay, and Tony Finau finished in a group tied for 5th, 4 shots back. And I mean, all the way down to you had 35 players at double digits under par, which I know that, it's not exactly the hardest course on tour, but played a little bit easier than generally in past years with the wet course conditions. Only 3 guys finished over par. I was on Team Benny on last week, so that was disappointing. He had to withdraw. But those things happen sometimes, and it's not like he didn't show up at all. So any other takeaways from that event last week before we turn the page?
No, just, from like a golf tour scheduling standpoint, I'm interested to see what happens with TBC River Highlands. Like, do they keep going there? Or are they frustrated that they tried to make it harder and it didn't really work? I think as a fellow Northeasterner, New Englander, we should have a tournament up there. We have a lot of better tracks than that, though. It's okay, I think, sometimes to roll in a birdie fest and let's see what these guys can do in those scenarios, especially coming off of a very difficult task at Pinehurst, difficult task at Memorial the week prior. So yeah, I mean, I guess I don't hate it, but I wouldn't mind seeing another New England course kind of in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising that there's pretty condensed population up that way. You look at some of the other sports, all the major professional sports have lots of teams up in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts area. And to not have golf go there very often, I know, climate can be a factor when you're not in the summer months, but at this time of year, you could have a couple events up there. And I think, more people would appreciate that. Heck, we've got events. This week we're in Detroit. Next week you're out in Illinois by me. And of course, I don't want to tell them to take the John Deere Classic away, but we got tournaments here in the Midwest that surely there's some courses in the Northeast that could be featured that, a lot of people just don't know about, including myself. Mm-hmm. We just haven't seen them. All right, let's go ahead and move forward to this week's event. Again, weak field. We've got the Rocket Mortgage Classic in Detroit Golf Club this week. This is the 5th year that this event has been held here. Tends to be a birdie fest, but Ryan, what do we got for a venue this weekend in general?
Yeah, it's just no way around it. It is probably the easiest thing that we see on tour. It is a just fairly straight layout that does not have a lot of penalties for wayward shots. Basically, there's one hole with water on the entire track, or par 72, 73 and change from the tips. So middle of the pack in terms of course length, and as flat as can be. Like, there's really no elevation changes. Ron, our guy PGA Splits 101, is out there this week, and their really only defense is rough that they typically tend to grow out. I don't know if they're behind on it, but it's like Ron did the standard throw the ball in the rough thing the other day, and there's just clean lies. The ball's right there sitting up nicely. I just think we're gonna have these guys really firing at pins here. You've seen a ton of rain in the Detroit and the Midwest area as well as of late, so the course is going to be soft, especially early in the week, and getting these guys on a golf course where there's really no penalty off the tee. So you're just going to see club head covers coming off. I believe last year, 78% were driver off the tee. So that would be a driver heavy course for us for sure. And again, when you could just go without penalty off the tee, ripping fairway, ripping drivers, doesn't really matter if you hit the fairway, because you're going to be able to have such a lofted club into these greens. And if they're soft, even more reason for guys to be able to can be concerned if they're playing from the fairway. Now, you said we've only been here for 5 years. We've seen a decent mix of stylistic players that have contended here, but we go back to the original year. This was the year where we had back-to-back venues of Bryson and Matthew Wolff, just absolute bombers off the tee. You've seen, Pendrith, Finau win here. Cam Young's had a couple of really nice showings here. So you've seen guys just have a massive advantage with distance off the tee. Supposedly the greens are what can be the mitigator from low scores, but it just doesn't tend to be the factor here. So, it's one of those spots where you want to be in the right corridor. There are some different spots where if you're in the wrong spot, you're going to be a little bit longer from a putting standpoint, but just seems to be nothing that's going to hold these guys out from being into the low mid 20s, even in a weaker field without the upper echelons of the, Schefflers and Xanders of the world. I think we're still going to be in the low mid 20s.
Yeah, I believe if I remember right, this was the tournament where Bryson broke the strokes gained approach model for because he was just blasting it as far as he could off the tee, knowing that he could probably manage with whatever lie he ended up with, and he was out there 50 yards farther than anybody else, and it was picking up the wrong data for tee shots and approach shots and how the PGA Tour was calculating those metrics at the time. So truly fascinating. But you're going to see guys grip it and rip it as much as they can around here. Certainly the par fives. You're going to see some scoring. Tony Finau was on record, a couple years ago saying that he thinks somebody could get to 30 under here. Hasn't happened yet, but gotten into the mid 20s. 4 of the 5 years that this course has been hosting a PGA Tour event. So we know we're going to need to make birdies. The weather seems fairly nice for this time of year in the Midwest, so I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about scores being affected by 40-mile-an-hour winds or anything like that. Just comes down to making birdies, scoring on the par fives, and giving yourself as many looks to score as you can. So that's the course we have this week. Let's go ahead and start digging into the field. And again, it's going to seem like everybody's overpriced when you pull it up. It's all relative, but we don't have a clear, say, Scheffler at plus 300 or, somebody that's a runaway favorite at the top. In fact, it's probably as condensed as we've seen it in a while, where you've got maybe 5 or 6 guys in the plus 1000s, where, if you're a person that likes to bet outright winners, but still sometimes play some guys at lower odds, this might be the week that you finally feel like it's kind of fun to do that without Scheffler and some of the other guys in there. So does the nature of this field, does it lend you towards trying to avoid the top guys a little bit more this week? Because in my opinion, there's not a huge talent gap between the top 3 golfers and like the 20th best golfer in this field, yet they still make the pricing algorithm to where everybody's got to kind of be split out there. So I guess my question there is, do you avoid the top range a little more this week, or is there somebody in there you like?
Yes, it's also too in the way that they've changed the dynamic scoring now on the pricing on the back end too, where like you have the guys that are in the 5Ks. Like sometimes you have to make a case for some guys that are down there when you're trying to jam in Scotty, Xander, or even doing builds where you have multiple of those guys. I don't think you necessarily need it because to your point, like it's all relative. So seeing Tom Kim at 11K is definitely a little bit jolting, but at the same time, it's just quality of the field. So I'm with you. Like I don't think there's a huge gap between those guys. I think ownership more so than normal weeks, even too, like ownership and birdies, I think are really kind of the way to go this week. Like if I'm going to go a little bit off the board or maybe punting on some of these guys that might be a little bit lower owned, I still need them. I still need to know that when the conditions are what we're being asked to handle this week, they can make birdies in bunches. So really trying to be able to punt off of chalk, especially expensive chalk towards the top, I think is probably the right way to go. So even that top tier is not super exciting to me this week, 10K and above, just because I think they're all going to take on some decent ownership. And I don't know that you're losing a ton just in terms of relative upside when you go down into the 9K and even some of the guys in the top of the 8s. So yeah, it's not, especially like we're early in ownership. I'm sure you guys are as well. Yeah, but looking at Tom Kim, Cam Young, Minwoo Lee being, north or right around 25% is a little bit hard to stomach this week.
Yeah, it is. And, right now I think we've got Tom Kim at like 37. We've got, Cam Young at 25 and Lee and Noren a little bit further back. But if Kim ends up, not that I don't like Tom Kim here. I mean, obviously played well last week, has played well here. But given the 11K price tag and people are going to feel like they need to spend up on somebody. So there's going to be ownership. I would just rather play the, bomb and gouge and hope Cam Young can find some momentum after shooting a 59 last week. Another kind of big highlight from last week. Ended up he didn't do too well the first couple days, so the 59, put him in the mix. Ended up finishing T9, but obviously a guy who can make some birdies and hit the ball out there a long way. So, and right now we've got Young at like 12% less ownership than Tom Kim. So I think if I play anybody there, it's probably Cam Young first and probably Noren second. He also tends to not pick up a ton of ownership. Did miss the cut as a relatively popular value at the U.S. Open. So, or not necessarily value, but more of a mid-range play in that tournament. So I like Noren as kind of my second guy in there, but kind of to Ryan's point, agree with the same kind of logic of maybe passing on this top group and just going with a more balanced approach, given that you're not sacrificing a ton to leave the top, say, 6 or 8 guys on the board. But we'll have a good amount of exposure to Cam Young. Probably won't with Tom Kim if our ownership projections hold. So anything else on that top range for you?
No, the one that I like in the top range, if I had to go there, and some of the stuff that I've looked at too, I think it's very, very easy to start below this group. Just the ceiling of Min-Woo Lee in terms of his baseline putting skills, his ability to post some what we refer to as spike putting weeks. We have access in the rabbit hole, our search engine tool over at Betsperts Golf, to actually see how frequently someone is gaining, say 1, 2, 3, up to 5 strokes in any of the strokes gain metrics. When you look at strokes gain putting, we've seen Min-Woo Lee be able to flash and post some rounds where he's gaining 2, 3 strokes more so than some of the other guys that are in that bucket. So Min-Woo would probably be where I go, but I'm very, very comfortable starting lineups here in the 9K range.
All right, let's go ahead and head down there. I certainly agree with that thought process as well. We've got 5 golfers in the 9K range. Akshay Bhatia, who's coming off a strong week last week, faded just a bit on Sunday, but Taylor Pendrith, back-to-back top 25s. Jaeger has kind of gotten back on track after a bit of a tough stretch. Then you've got Zalatoris, and then, of course, Fowler, who will be fairly polarizing in the 9K range this week. So who do you like best in there?
Yeah, I love that ownership projection in this thought process too of skipping the upper tier. It's very comfortable starting lineups with Taylor Pendrith this week. When you think about how he's playing, I think this is sort of the best golf of his career, even if you kind of erase the sample of data that would capture his win in May. And that was, again, besides this, probably the ultimate bomb and gouge birdie fest at TPC Craig Ranch. He's got 5 top 25 or better finishes in his past 6 starts. The putter has been an absolute weapon. Everything else has become a little bit more consistent. He's got a ton of length. We've seen that 2 appearances here, T14, T2, but he's gained strokes putting in 16 of 18 starts, and he's gained strokes in 75% of his rounds played this year. That's the highest rate in this field, and has shown some spiked upside there too. So again, like just prototypical, if I'm making a player in the lab this week in terms of what I want a guy to do, I want distance, and I want you to be able to have some spike putting, and Pendrith really has that in spades. So at the price too is really nice. And again, if you're going to tell me he's going to be sub 20, again, a little bit high, but not like relative to the guys around him, I think that's a great way to start. So nice prices in the betting market for him as well. But yeah, I love sub 20% Pendrith.
Yeah, I know Noto likes him too this week. So you can get the, and I don't mind it either. I didn't tag him up in the lineup HQ like Noto did, but, and I like Jaeger. I think if they end up coming in around the same ownership, I'll probably be overweight on both. We do have Jaeger a little bit higher right now, but obviously over the last 12 months has just become a much better golfer overall. And even when he wasn't in as good a form as he's been in this year, he has a T9 and a 5th, solo 5th in the last 2 years at this event. Obviously, the form has dipped just a bit in recent months, not unexpected after how well he played for so long, but kind of has shown a little bit of signs of coming out of that. Was kind of hoping that the last 3 or 4 starts would maybe cool off the interest in him this week, but everybody's pretty smart, so it looks like that's probably not going to fool anyone. But Pendrith and Jaeger, I think, are my 2 favorites in this range, and I don't have any issue with Akshay, but not huge on Zalatoris. I don't think there's any chance that Zalatoris can contend in a tournament that's going to get to mid-20s under par. Just don't think he can make enough putts. And then Fowler, as the defending champ, will certainly get some attention. I am not paying $9,000 for Ricky Fowler, even in this economy. It's just not happening. So give me Pendrith, give me Jaeger in the 9Ks, and really I feel okay with just using those two. Do you have any interest in the others?
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, Zal is the guy I was kind of touching on at the top of the show. I mean, just in terms of overall skill set, you would expect him to be in that 10K tier. Hasn't been playing as well, but again, like think about where we want Zal and where he's really cut his teeth so far since he's been a pro. He's just kind of in these like harder tracks against tougher fields. He just isn't a guy that profiles currently as someone that's going to win or really contend when we need to get into the low 20s. Jaeger, I absolutely love as well. When you think about, again, he obviously probably one of the more impressive wins of the season. The dude went toe to toe with Scotty in Houston and took him down. Like no one else really has done that this year. But his other, besides the win, top 3 finishes on tour this season, Torrey Pines and the Mexico Open, driver heavy with very little to no penalty for a missed fairway. Now they grow the rough out a little bit at Torrey, but again, for the guys, when you have that much distance, it's just not really a thing. And as you mentioned, we had a little bit of a lull for Jaeger, but the irons have kind of heated back up the last couple rounds out. So that's really nice to see. And we saw in those weeks where he contended, the putting's been bad too, but he has that upside where he can get really hot and the putter can get up there too. So that would be my only concern with Jaeger, is I think he's better than some of the guys around him. It just doesn't matter if the putter is kind of hanging out. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, I bet on him to win. I like him to finish well here too. And just, had some nice showings here as well. So yeah, I think he's probably with, also with Pendrith. Those are my top 2 in the 9K range.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there. I'm sure Noto would agree with that too. I know he's usually a Jaeger guy. Didn't get his thoughts on Jaeger this week, but that seems pretty clear for that tier. And I think once we get into the next range, getting into the 8Ks, that's kind of where you'll start to see ownership spread out a little bit more. It's tough to do at the top just because there's not a whole lot of different options this week. And again, people are going to feel, hey, I got to spend somewhere. It's even more noticeable, if you're playing on FanDuel, although they have tightened up their pricing just a little bit this week. But you get into the 8Ks, you're not going to see a whole lot of chalk as far as like 20% plus owned guys. In fact, everybody that we have projected at 20+% owned, we've already hit on, with the exception of McNeely, who is right there at 8,900. Right now we've got him at 22% projected ownership. So he's the one guy that maybe in this range is going to get steamed up a little bit, but everybody else kind of in the mid-teens, low to mid-teens. So picking the right guy in here is going to be pretty important. We've got Robert McIntyre, Keith Mitchell, Davis Thompson, who I've talked about most of the year, finally getting some love now. Ryan Fox, another pretty big hitter, up at 8,200. Aaron Rye. Who are you looking at in the 8K range?
I kind of love a bunch of guys here. It's another reason why I'm very comfortable kind of punting on that top tier. I'm in on Mav, plus 20 ownership. I get it. Just at a distance this season, he's been a little bit more consistent with the irons and is just one of the best baseline putters that we have on tour. And it really has been since he's been in the field. It's just a nice spot for him where I think he can kind of hang from a birdie standpoint. Bobby Mack is also a fantastic baseline putter, which is, I understand why people might be reluctant to think he's been on a good run, but really the putting is something that I think is fairly sticky for what he's been doing too. You can't really build a model without Keith Mitchell appearing highly in it. Just a matter, does that actually translate? Do I like Mitchell in a birdie fest? Not quite as much. The other guy that's got real sneaky putting upside and a ton of distance is Ryan Fox. Fox can hit it a mile, and the putter is stable and has some upside. We saw it in Canada a couple of times ago. And this is a guy historically, like I think anytime we're talking about guys to roster in DFS or guys to bet on, you kind of want a couple of things, right? You want them obviously to be in good form. You want them to be a good course fit for what we think the test is for the week. Ideally, they're married the two. But then you look at some of these guys just that have played for years and they get white hot for like a month or so. And Ryan Fox is a guy that when you look at like his finishing positions over the last handful of years, even if you look at DP World Tour stuff, he just pieces together top 5s, top 10s, regardless of the course style. He just, when he's on it, he's on it. And he's kind of in it a little bit. Like it wasn't a great showing at the US Open. He made the cut, but he's just kind of been in the mix a bunch of late. So maybe I'm hoping to catch the tail end of that. So Fox at sub 10% ownership, I think is very, very interesting here. And I want to be early on, Thor, the new, PGA Tour Michael Thorburn, the kid from Massachusetts that's just been awesome at Stanford and in college, not carrying much ownership here, turned pro last week at the Travelers. Not a great performance, but he had T4 there last year, the year before. I think there's just a ton of upside. His driver is a weapon, has shown some putting upside early too. So I think Fox and Thor kind of under 10% ownership are pretty interesting.
Yeah, Fox has always been a guy I like to talk about here on the show. The off the tee game is great. The putter can be great. Everything in between, you kind of got to hold your breath a little bit.
Yep.
But the in between stuff is not. I mean, if you're hitting it a mile off the tee and you got a wedge into a lot of these holes, or you're going for the green and 2 on the par 5s, then that approach play isn't necessarily as important if you've got a wedge in your hand compared if you got an 8-iron or a 7-iron in your hand. So these are the types of courses where I don't mind taking a shot on somebody like Ryan Fox, especially since, the more casual player is simply going to look at Ryan Fox in there. He's not going to project super well. And they're just going to think that he's kind of out of place. He's a pretty easy guy to just pass on. Doesn't have a ton of, elite history on the PGA Tour. Has played in Europe quite a bit. But yeah, I'm always a sucker for good logic behind Ryan Fox, and this is certainly one of those weeks. I'd probably take him over Mitchell. I really don't see a whole lot of difference between the two of them, and right now we've got Fox at like half the ownership of Mitchell. So I'll take Fox in there. I think Thompson's fine as well. Chris Kirk's another guy that maybe doesn't have the form quite as recently, but has tended to play this course very well in the past. Pretty much every time. I think he's never finished outside the top 25 here. So those are guys that you can sprinkle in. I agree that if you're going with that balanced build, I mean, you can get 2 or 3 of those guys in here. You can get McNeely in there, and it's pretty easy to watch a lineup come together with some guys from that range. All right, let's go ahead and move into the 7K range. This field starts to thin out in a hurry. So, we've probably hit on like half of the relevant golfers, maybe more than half of the relevant golfers already. As we get down into the 7K range, it's going to start to find slimmer pickings to find golfers that you like. I'm not just going to rattle off every name in here, but we can pick out some guys that we like. So who are you liking as we get down into the 7Ks?
Yeah, a couple guys. I like Mark Hubbard. I think the floor is probably pretty high. You can question whether or not he has the ceiling, but I like the ownership projection here on him as well. If he's sub 10%, I kind of agree with the Taylor Moore dot that I'm seeing there too. I mean, Taylor Moore, just in terms of he's coming off of, I think the ownership might be down because he didn't play well last time out, but it was hard to be over par or struggling to, be better than, even last week where everyone else was just throwing birdies all over the place, and Moore struggled a little bit, but he's a guy that hits it far and the putter can run hot. So I like him quite a bit. And Matt Wallace too. Matt Wallace is a guy that just baseline putting. When I'm typically building models, or typically don't do a ton with putting because we know it's probably the more noisy stat just week to week. But Matt Wallace's baseline putting performance is really strong, and I think it matters this week. Looked at the last handful of years since they've been coming here, like 40% of the strokes gains are on the greens here. So you have to have it. This is a spot where you can't just kind of just beat everyone tee to green and hope you have an average week. You got to be able to pile up the birdies, and Wallace can do that. So having him sub 5% is pretty interesting.
Yeah, another guy that, the masses have kind of been a little bit slow to catch on, but you look at his results wherever he's played here the last few months, he's played pretty well. He's played in some of the alternate field events.
Yep.
He's played one event on the DP World Tour, played in the Canadian Open a few weeks back. So, but no horrible results in there to speak of. Svensson's another guy that I think will get a little bit of attention. Did make 20 birdies himself last week. Hasn't shown as much maybe upside over the last 5 or 6 months, but the dot on Taylor Moore, that was mine. So I agree with that call as well. The form, if we go back like 2 months, Moore would be the super popular kind of mid-range value. Sure. The recent starts will knock him back a little bit in terms of the interest level, but he's had a couple good finishes here, very good finishes here as well. This is the type of course where we could expect him to pop. So I'm on Team Taylor Moore this week. I like the Matt Wallace call as well.
I want to offer a little bit of caution on Ben Griffin.
Sure.
I don't know the story for sure. Ron, again, is our guy out there this week. Ben Griffin has had an eye surgery since last time we saw him in Canada. And he told our guy, Ron, that he is kind of still seeing spots post-surgery. He's a little concerned about that. And there's a guy that like relies on the putter getting really hot. And that's what we saw from him last time out in Canada. I just think people might look at box scores or recent finishing positions and look at Ben Griffin played pretty well in Canada and ran some birdies up there. I don't know what to make of that. He offered that up as information. So I think that that's something we should probably at least be a little bit cautious of if you're trying to get overweight and bang a bunch of Ben Griffin into your lineups this week. Just know that he might not be 100% in terms of line of sight, lining up putts and stuff like that. It's a little curious.
And he did play last week and finished 4th from last. So maybe still trying to work it out with that. I'm sure that's a little uncomfortable if you're trying to get used to new, anything new with your vision can kind of play tricks on you. So certainly a good nugget to pass along. Seen some chatter on a few guys here. I don't really have strong takes on these guys, but Sam Stevens, I think Noto tagged up Lee Hodges this week. And some people might note that Daniel Berger seems a little bit cheap at 7,000. Again, I don't have strong takes on these guys. I kind of like the Hodges call a little bit from Noto. But you got any strong takes on anybody else here around 7,000?
No, not a great tier. I mean, you could make a case for Berger, Cam Davis, and Nicolai Højgaard just as, bets on talents because they probably are better than this tier of golfers. The form isn't great. I don't know that they're great course fits, but I think it's a tier that you can skip, especially if there's, not getting anyone that's like massive leverage or anything like that. Or I don't think you're leaving a ton of upside. I mean, people would have been tripping all over themselves to play Eric Cole in the low 7s a couple months ago, and the golf just has not been good. So it's kind of an easy avoid. But I guess I would say Højgaard just because I think he's better than this. But especially if he's a little bit underowned and it gets closer to maybe 5 or shorter, depending on what I'm doing at the top, that'd be pretty appealing. But not a range that I'm trying to really jam a bunch of guys in.
Yeah. All right. As we head down to the value range, again, the pricing goes all the way down to 5K this week, but there's not a whole lot in there to get excited about. Though there are some interesting stories with the Monday qualifiers this week. We got like a Club Pro guy that I was reading the Monday Q story this morning. He downed a couple beers before the playoff and then ended up qualifying for his first PGA Tour event. I can't find the name now, but I noticed right when I got home, I think there's a 15-year-old in the field this week. Yeah. So, you know who that is off the top of your head now? I can't. I'll be able to find it.
Russell, what's his name? Russell's either the first or the last name, but yeah, he's 15. It's crazy. I mean, my 16-year-old got his license today. I can't imagine him playing a PGA Tour event.
Miles Russell.
Crazy. Miles Russell. There you go. Yeah.
So 15 and he's a lefty. Just some cool stories. But cool stories are cool, but DFS wise, not a whole ton in the 5Ks that you're just going to want to go after, and nor that you absolutely need to go after, especially if you're going lower on the high end guys. But the 6Ks, there's some options that you can certainly consider. Obviously, anybody that's watched my stuff for a long time is probably going to know that I'll be partial to Doug Gim. He's another one of those guys that obviously you question how many putts he can make if it's going to be a birdie fest, but you're not expecting him to win the tournament at 6.9K on DraftKings. And there's a whole lot of guys you're not going to find somebody that's great at everything once you get down here. So we know the tee to green game will be there most likely with Gim. Just hoping he can make enough putts to maybe sneak a top 10, top 15 out of it. Let's see. Justin Lower's another guy that I've got a decent amount of exposure to in my early runs this week. And then it kind of dips from there, but who's sticking out to you as a value?
Couple at 6,700. We know that Brendan Todd can get hot with the flat stick, and that's what we need this week too. Lacks obviously distance, put himself in position off the tee. in the fairway, but we need him to be just white hot with the putter, and he does have that ability. Also at 6,700 is Chandler Phillips, has been playing really good golf. Again, very much a Brennan Todd type player. Lacks distance. The irons have been pretty solid, and the putter has shown a pretty stable baseline. I think he's pretty interesting too if you want to kind of punt in that level. I think Jake Knapp is going to get a little bit of ownership because he's shown a little bit of upside early this year. Obviously, he's played pretty well. In spots like this where you're able to go off the tee and bang it down there and you need to score a lot of birdies. Golf hasn't been great from him of late, but 6,400 down there on Jake Knapp. Neil Shipley, who is still an amateur, 6,300.
He's turning pro.
So low am a couple times out in some big boy events. He's going to be, I think, pretty interesting just to watch play. I don't know if he's going to garner a lot of ownership, but it's definitely an exciting name. And you want to go all the way down. I might be jumping ahead of myself, but I know we're kind of
for it.
We're in the low range. I think he might be 5K flat. Yeah, 5K flat for Ben James, who is the junior out of Virginia. He's shown some upside, qualified for the U.S. Open. Went like 65, 64 to qualify. I think he's fourth ranked AM in the world right now. Bottom of your screen, Ben James, not garnering much ownership at all, but like there's some upside here. You're going to go 64, 65 to qualify for the U.S. Open. That's impressive to me. Is showing a little bit of upside. Obviously, nice little amateur career so far. So as a junior, we'll probably see him on tour here sooner than later. So if you happen to want to go a little bit heavy at the top, you want to jam in, Minwoo and Pendrith and Jaeger, you need to save some money down there. Ben James is going to open that up for you all the way down to 5K.
All right. And yeah, that'll certainly free up some salary to use at some other spots. So I think we've pretty much hit on everybody that's going to be in my player pool. With this being such a weak event, Noto being out tonight, we're going to skip the snake draft, though I do have to mention that I edged Noto out for the last cash position last week. So by like 8 points. It was a tough week. And even though he took Scheffler in the snake draft with the first pick, even though I said he shouldn't, because he was, taking the stance against him. But anyway, I'll go to the bank with my $8 from the snake draft, but we'll pick that back up next week. I wanted to give Ryan a chance that if he wants to, you can roll up a screen share if you want to show off anything over at Betsperts for a minite. You've been kind of talking about the putting splits. You can whatever you want to show off, feel free, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to look at some stuff, the cool things that we can do here. If you're not familiar with this, reach out, have any questions. It's pretty straightforward. You can add a lot of different conditions and ways to look at all this data because this is officially licensed PGA Tour data, but the ability to filter it by certain conditions, I think, make it unique. So I like to take a look at this week's a big thing that I want to look at. I want to look at who's played well in easy and very easy scoring conditions. And I want to see too, when guys, and you have the ability to look at, we can bring that up real quick. I can show you what that looks like the last, 6 months here. You back up to the last year, who's performed well in this scenario. Just when, like this tells us, hey, when we need to get birdies, who's at their best. One other cool feature you could put on here is put a minimum round feature. So you're kind of taking out the small sample guys. So you're not getting all that noise in there, but you want to see who plays well in these conditions here. We've seen Eric Cole, our guy, Steven Jaeger in that spot. Cam Davis is another nod to Brendan Todd. You see Noren, Svensson, Ben Coles back in the field. Again, played well, is getting a bump for his almost win there at Craig Ranch against Pendrith. Ben Griffin, we have to be cautious with. So I think this is an interesting way to see who plays well when birdie fests are necessary. I also want to see who plays well when they could just rip driver off the tee without any worry. We have the ability to look at off the tee club selection. So driver heavy in scenarios where the missed fairway penalty is low. So I'm going to go average and low. So I want to take out any spots where there would be a high penalty for going wayward off the tee. And this just shows you spots where if I look at ball striking in this scenario, we'll back out, say, last 2 years to get a better scenario or a better time frame. These are the ball striking numbers because this is really what we're looking at, right? This is telling us about shot 1 and shot 2. When you're able to just kind of rip driver and not worry about what's going on in terms of your approach shots. You see Gary Woodland, Luke List, Johnny Vegas, again, another nod to Steven Jaeger. You see Tom Kim in here, Zal. This is looking at ball striking. You want to look at total. It's obviously going to capture putting there as well. I think this is an interesting way to use the rabbit hole to get you an idea of who plays well in those scenarios. And then I'll give you 30 seconds on that putting view. If you go into floor ceiling, this is kind of what we talk about with spike weeks, right? How often does that actually happen? You can look at this with any filter, any condition, any time frame, and any of the strokes gain metrics. But we just want to look at strokes gain putting this all season, so the last 6 months. How often is someone gaining strokes putting? So we'll get out some of the smaller guys, smaller sample. You can see here, as I mentioned, Pendrith, 75% of the time he is gaining strokes on the field. Some other names that are up there that are, I think, pretty interesting as well. We mentioned Chandler Phillips there. Pearson Coody's another one too. Hits it a mile and can run hot with the putter. I think he's 5,900, so a pretty cheap one too. But like actual spike putting weeks, how often are guys gaining, say, 2 or more strokes on the field? There's another spot for Coody. You can see here, you get a little bit lower. Garrick Higo is an interesting name. Sam Ryder, Justin Subb, Bo Hostler. There's a shout out to Hubbard, who I mentioned there too. Matt Wallace. So actually putting numbers behind the terminology that we talk about in terms of like, oh, baseline for Scotty, right? Until he kind of figured it out. Scotty just tee to green is fantastic. Luke List, tee to green, fantastic. If we can actually get a spike putting week from that guy, What does that look like? This is telling you how often it's happening. And you can put any of the conditions you want to look at this through the lens of POA bench splits or anything like that. You could do it too. So I think it's a great resource to help you. This is not something you can model, but I think for DFS, the floor ceiling look, I think, is a great view to kind of look at every week.
Awesome. Really good stuff there. And again, we're partnering with Betsperts Golf to help get you access to some of this stuff. So if you've got questions, reach out. You can, of course, reach out to us here at RotoGrinders. And then, Ryan, if they want to get a hold of you guys directly, what do you advise for a platform to find you?
Yeah, Betsperts Golf, you can DM us specifically on Twitter. If you're looking to get you a promo code, check us out for a week, check us out for a month. It's a full rolling annual sub. So you get an annual subscription. It's not just for the calendar year. It's a full 12 months. If you want to try us out for 3 months, we have a promo right now, just summertime. So basically buy 2 months, you get the third for free. But again, you can hit us up directly on Twitter, DM us on Betsperts Golf. If you want to just get a promo code, I'll make one for you and let you try it out.
All right. Great stuff as always. Appreciate you filling in on a week where it's not exactly the most exciting golf to talk about, but hey, we had a good time anyway, right?
Yep. Edges to be had, right, buddy? Always.
That's right. Always money to be won. Everybody's got the same player pool. And if you win a bunch of money, you don't care whether it's the U.S. Open or if it's the Rocket Mortgage. So wishing all of you the best of luck. Noto should be back next week. We'll bring the snake draft back next week as well. And again, thanks to Ryan for joining us. Thanks to Steve for working hard producing behind the scenes. I'm Justin. We hope you have a great week and good luck in all your contests. And we'll see you back here next week, everybody. Take care.